Hello everyone, and welcome back to Trading Secrets. In this video, I will be dealing with a topic that is rather heavy and perhaps a bit uncomfortably contemporary. I am of course talking about Indian indentured labor. In my first month out here in the Netherlands, my friend asked me if I would like to try Surinamese food. I said yes, excited to try a new cuisine. When I saw it arrived, I thought my friend must be pulling my leg, but he assured me it was Surinamese food. I was now eating roti and a potato sabzi with green beans. Confused, I had to look up why two countries on the other side of the globe had nearly identical food. And what I learned opened up an entirely new chapter of Indian history I wish my history textbooks could have spent longer teaching. If you were intrigued by the history behind Enjoy Enjami or Nadia from Indian matchmaking,
so my family's from Guyana, our ancestry is from India.
This video should help you relate to their stories just a little more. So let's dive straight into it. Towards the end of the 18th century, European slave traders and plantation owners had been making shed loads of money from exploiting slaves brought from Africa to their fertile plantations in the Americas. Sugar and cotton trade was making them several folds richer by the day. But by the start of the 19th century, after long debates following the first abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, the European courts were inching closer to declaring slave trade and slavery as inhumane and illegal. In 1834, after multiple uprisings by enslaved people on various plantations, the abolitionists managed to pass it into law. Slave labor was now changed to a finite contract, after which people could claim their freedoms. The slave traders and plantation owners were not happy about this development. Sir John Gladstone was one such distressed individual who owned plantations in Jamaica and Demerara. He wrote one too many letters to the British Parliament expressing his concerns over, as he put it, rather difficult situation that he and the other merchants will be put in after the so-called apprenticeship of the slaves expires in 1840. Now faced with the possibility of loss of cheap labor and a decline in trade revenue, the British government, after probably not much hesitation, decided to rope in Indian labor to take to their plantations instead. Thinking of Indians as lesser humans, they had no qualms taking advantage of them, and thus the indentured labor system was introduced, where people would, by their own volition, work on the plantations. The British didn't actually invent the concept of indentured labor. It has long existed in our global history. The pyramids, for example, while they were not built by slaves or aliens at all, they were most definitely built by people who signed off their lives for rigorous backbreaking work to help build them. The Romans had similar systems in place where common people were able to pay off their debts by entering indentureship. British and Irish working class people themselves had been sent to British colonies in North America as bonded labor. So in 1834, no sooner than the abolishment of slavery, the French and the British started recruiting Indian labor to be taken to their colonies. They called them coolies, a word that originally in Telugu referred to day laborers. These coolies entered into a 5-year contract under which they were promised a decent salary with an option to renew the contract or return to India afterwards. It also promised them a small plot of land, decent housing, and promises of a better life. But of course, most of it was a con. The British relied on failing crops and worsening famines to sort of drive people to enter into the contract, and they took advantage of the Indian population's illiteracy and lack of geographical knowledge. Most of them were told that the journey would be no longer than 6 hours, but for many the reality of their fate quickly sank in. What should have been a short journey turned into a harsh sea travel for over 3 months to get to the furthest reaches of the globe. The now indentured labor would sign up with an agent and would have to appear in front of the local officer to declare their free will to enter into bonded labor. The people would sign up as either an individual or sometimes would take their entire families with them. After having done that, they would be taken to one of several warehouses to wait to board a ship. The agents and the British government would deliberately move people all over the country So they would be a mix of people from different castes, regions, and speaking different languages. Like a snow globe shaken really hard. The ships would wait for the right number of people to gather to set sail. This could take weeks. When the ships left the ports, it became increasingly clear to the people that they were headed towards an unkind future. Some ships arrived shortly in Sri Lanka to work at colonial tea plantations. Other ships docked further at Mauritius heading to South Africa. But the rest were split into two different directions, one going eastwards to the Polynesian islands of Fiji and the other westward to the Caribbean island nations of Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and largely to Guyana, or British Guyana as it was called at the time. And this is just the British colonial part of it. Over the course of nearly 80 years, ships carrying Indian bonded labor left from French ports in India to go to their French colonies, and Go and Portuguese were taken to work on Portuguese colonies. Later on, from 1873, the Dutch also took advantage of the system to bring indentured labor to Suriname, then known as Dutch Guyana. It is estimated that the poor conditions on the ship and the shock of being torn away from their homeland may have resulted in nearly 1/3 of the total number of people succumbing to their deaths before even arriving at their destination. By 1840 alone, upwards of 20,000 coolies were brought to South America, and in the 80+ years of migration, more than 1 million Indian immigrants were just scattered across the globe. When they arrived at the plantations, it was no different than what the enslaved people before them had to endure. The plantation owners themselves were, still just as rotten to the core as they were before the slave trade was abolished. Little to no effort was put into improving the accommodations or treatment of the people who were about to arrive. The shackles were off, but the hardships were the same. The coolies were moved into the same disease-ridden housing quarters of the former slaves, and they did the exact same type of back-breaking work. But who were these coolies? Who did Indian indentured labor comprise of? A vast majority of the targeted people were either Dalits or people belonging to the oppressed lower caste in Hinduism, or Muslims. People from different corners of the country with no common languages. In order to provide incentives for the coolies to extend their contract, the British had the agents make sure that they recruited at least 40 women for every 100 men that would board the ship. A bulk of these women who traveled alone were widowed Brahmin or upper caste women whose lives were no worse than slavery as a widow in the Hindu society. So these were the people from the most struggling strata of the Indian society who couldn't envision any sort of upward mobility in their own homelands because of the rigid and casteist system in place. So they volunteered to be put on boats, hoping for a better future. And so I think it's important to recognize that while the British and the other colonial powers were nothing but cruel to the people in their colonies, India had or has a system in place where some people are so beyond oppressed that they would rather sign away their freedoms in exchange for some hope for a better future. Once at the plantations, because of the social and geographical isolation, the coolies were forced to bridge the existing cultural and religious gaps between them. And their Indian identity eventually creolized into a new Indo-Caribbean or Indo-Polynesian ethnic identity. There are several accounts documented by the descendants of the migrants talking about the new-formed kinship with total strangers to bring in some sense of belonging. This system of Indian indentured labor came to an end in 1917 after increasing pressure from Mahatma Gandhi and the other Indian nationalists. Gandhi first encountered coolies in South Africa when he went there to work as a privileged young man for the British government. Adding to the pressure, World War I was well on its way and the profitability of the plantations was on the decline. Many people stayed back and are now a significant population of countries like Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Malaysia, South Africa, and some also in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Despite the end of indentureship and subsequent freedom struggles for their new homelands, life never became quite easy for any of them. Some Indians who tried to repatriate in India were reported to have returned to their plantations as the caste disparity in India was no longer bearable. The Indian diaspora has met with severe opposition by the native population and also freed slaves who are citizens of the same country but do not see the Indian diaspora as valid citizens. They have faced extreme violence in the 60s in Guyana and similarly in Fiji and also in Sri Lanka. I went through some articles written by the descendants. They believe they are caught in a limbo because many Indians don't see them as Indian enough and the people of the Caribbean don't see them as Caribbean enough. Nevertheless, this community is slowly flourishing again and is now a vibrant culture which holds on to many of its Indian and cultural heritage, but also the cultures of their new homelands. And in the Netherlands, I get to enjoy their beautiful food, and I can eat baras every day. The word coolie is now deemed derogatory and racist. But in India, it's still used to refer to porters at railway stations and to make awful movies. Colonial era indentureship ceased to exist in 1917, but it still continues today in all sorts of manners. The long queue of people from India, Pakistan and Bangladesh waiting to be taken to the Gulf countries is no different. Recently, an Al Jazeera documentary opened my eyes to bonded labor of Punjabi Indians in south of Italy on farms run by Dutch businessmen. Even in India, most sugar plantations have an indirect indentureship in place, where laborers are paid up front and they must work off their salary. Deflectors are punished severely. It is very easy to just always blame the British for everything that happened in the past. I often do. But perhaps we could have a look around us and see what we can do today. Okay, yes, I know that was heavy, but the topic is heavy. If you liked this video, do let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye!